Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Merci de nous rejoindre sur ce plateau. Ce soir, nous avons rendez-vous à Salem, une petite ville de Massachusetts connue pour ses histoires mystiques. Dans quelques instants, nous irons sur le terrain afin de vous donner plus de détails. Destination Salem, une localisation que beaucoup appellent ville des sorcières. Cette belle ville est connue pour être le site des procès des sorcières de Salem.
In a world that won't make sense to me, anything is home. I'm just flesh and blood, grew up from the mud, not sure who I ought to be, anyone will do.
Dans cette ville, des religieux puritains croyaient souvent que Satan était au travail depuis que des petites filles âgées de 10 à 12 ans ont commencé à crier, se débattre au lit, agir d'une manière possessive en se plaignant de recevoir des coups de fouet invisibles. Peu après, des accusations soi-disant que les filles ont été attaquées par des sorciers sont devenues virales. Une histoire qui s'est soldée par l'exécution de 19 personnes accusées d'être sorciers à Salem en 1692. Au final, des exécutions à tort, considérées comme l'une des plus graves tragédies couvertes par le gouvernement dans l'histoire de l'Amérique. Pour connaître la vérité, des historiens ont utilisé la technologie moderne pour découvrir les lieux exacts du drame que vous verrez à l'instant même. Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir. Nous sommes à Salem, Massachusetts aujourd'hui. Et comme pour vous rappeler, le procès des présumés sorciers de Salem, Massachusetts, ont eu lieu entre 1692 et 1693. Alors, c'est ici, dans cet endroit même, que 5 hommes présumés sorciers ont été exécutés. Et ce n'est qu'en 2017 que l'endroit a été enfin identifié et qu'à l'aide d'un groupe des historiens, un mémorial a été construit. De là, nous partons rencontrer Rachel Chris, la directrice de l'éducation de Salem Witch Museum. Suivez-nous.
History of Salem.
On est là aujourd'hui, on a eu à rencontrer des visiteurs qui sont venus pour encore mieux s'éduquer et vraiment visiter le musée pour encore mieux comprendre l'histoire des sorciers de Salem. Donc le combat continue et voilà, on est là pour vous et pour vous informer. Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Merci.
The Salem Witch Trials started based in events that began in January of 1692. So essentially during the winter of that year, the daughter and niece of Samuel Parris, who was the minister of Salem Village, fell ill with a very strange illness. No one quite knew what was wrong. They were falling to the ground, clutching their heads, screaming, making animal noises. And the adults were really quite shocked by this behavior. They wait about a month. The girls do not get better. They try all the usual remedies. They try fasting. They try prayer. They call in a doctor. The doctor looks at them and he says, I don't have a medical explanation or remedy for this type of behavior, but it could be the effects of bewitchment. And that's really what gets the events going during this time. And this was a perfectly natural thing to say in the 17th century. They, at this time, believed in the invisible world. So they believed that around you all the time, there could be spirits, there could be demons. The devil is engaged in this cosmic struggle with, everyday people. So these are, this is just part of the world of the 17th century. So to suggest that witches, who are, the helpers of the devil, were behind this was a perfectly natural thing to say at this point. And this leads the adults around Betty and Abigail to say, okay, so you're being hurt by witches. Who are these witches? They eventually come up with 3 names. They name Tituba, Sarah Osborne, and Sarah Good, who are kind of the perfect examples of the types of women who would normally be accused of witchcraft. They're all social outsiders. So, for example, Sarah Good is a beggar. She was known to be very loud, cantankerous. She would kind of, you'd go door to door begging. And if you didn't give her as much as she felt she deserved, she would yell at you, she'd curse. Sarah Osborne had scandalized the neighborhood by marrying one of her servants and also had been ill and hadn't been to church for some time. And then Tituba was a slave. So right off the bat in the 17th century, she is the ultimate other and outsider. So these 3 women, like I said, are kind of the typical people you'd see accused of witchcraft in the 17th century, again, because they are such outsiders. They're brought in, they're examined. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I am not a witch. However, Tituba, who's the last to be examined, initially says, no, I'm innocent, but breaks pretty quickly and says, you know what, you've got me. I am a witch, and there are other witches too. And, we can speculate, extensively about why Tituba does this, but it's really probably just a self-preservation move. She knows that no one's going to believe her in this courtroom. No one's going to come to her defense. And really the smartest thing for her to do, which turns out to be incredibly smart because she lives through the witch trials, is she tells them what she knows they want to hear. So she says, I'm a witch. There are other witches as well. And I've been to, meetings with the devil. And this triggers what we call a chain reaction witch hunt. So now they have to find the other witches who are in the community. So this leads to a pretty dramatic escalation. Throughout the year 1692, about 200 people are accused of witchcraft and imprisoned. 20 people are executed for the crime, which makes it the largest witch hunt to take place in colonial New England, or colonial North America, I should say. The trials themselves last from June to September of that year. They finally come to an end in October. There's a lot of reasons why they come to an end, but essentially it has a lot to do with the just growing sense of distrust in the court proceedings. You start to see this rising tide of people just saying, this court is getting out of control. They're not using the right kind of evidence. They're making decisions that are really arguably, not a great call. And then on top of all that, the governor of Massachusetts' wife gets accused of witchcraft. So she's never arrested or imprisoned, but just the fact that she could be named was really kind of a wake-up call for the governor. And he disbands the court of Oyer and Terminer, which is the court that had overseen the Salem witch trials. And that's really, you can say where we see the witch trials come to an end. They do, continue into January of 1693 when a new court is established that oversees the remaining witchcraft cases, the people who were still in jail. But really, by this point, the remaining convictions are overturned and the jails really start to slow and finally empty.
We went down to the Salem Memorial earlier, the Witch Trial Memorial. We looked at all the names and flowers. So, before coming here, I knew that it was a witch trial and that it was sort of in the late 1600s, but other than that, not much. And today has been a great source of information. We went to the PEM Museum and had a look at that, and that was just, it was incredibly interesting to look at the history of Salem beyond the witch trials even. So yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, I wrote a paper about them in high school about the mass hysteria that went on here. I think there was a lot of societal uncertainty and they were looking for some kind of scapegoat. And so basically it just devolved into everybody blaming each other for whatever they could, and it gave them a distraction.
I think the most interesting part about the museum is just how much this history has to do with so many different things going on today. And especially when you look back at a witch hunt and witch trials, there's a lot of different things going on. But here, the city of Salem is so rich in history, and, we have the witch trials, but on top of that, there's a maritime history. There's a lot of different things going on, and it's one of the most interesting pieces of history. All of them were innocent.
Oh, so what happened? Did somebody apologize later?
So, Ann Putnam apologized later. I think it was 14 years after the trials happened. The state of Massachusetts had a day in repentance for the trials, and she gave a letter to one of the reverends, and he read it in front of the congregation. But short of that, she was the only one to really say anything about the matter. There were plenty of people who were accusing. Over 150 people accused. 20 people died at the end of the day. So it was a major event, and you got to consider that the amount of people who actually lived here is a small population. That was a big ratio of people who were accused. I think that the city really just got caught up, or at that point the town just got caught up in a whirlwind of hysteria.
What intrigued me about Salem is the history, and I do tarot readings, and I read the crystal ball, so I'm really pulled into the energy here.
La catastrophe a commencé par l'exécution de 5 accusés en public devant les habitants de la ville en août 1692. Cette période s'avère être un moment de panique pour la colonie puritaine à Massachusetts. Les voisins s'accusaient d'être sorciers entre eux. À un moment donné, même les familles se pointaient du doigt de l'un de l'autre. Personne n'avait plus confiance à l'autre. Comme c'est une colonie religieuse, le prêtre local a cru que c'était Satan qui semait du désordre. La Cour de justice a entamé une action pour protéger la ville et la nouvelle stratégie était que tous les accusés doivent être condamnés et pendus. D'abord, il n'y avait que les femmes appartenant à la classe moyenne qui étaient accusées d'être sorcières, mais après, le tour des hommes est arrivé au 3e jour des exécutions quand un prêtre puritain, un père de famille, fidèle membre de l'Église, ont fait partie des 5 personnes tuées ce jour-là. Le premier des hommes à être accusé était John Proctor. Il a témoigné la mort des 5 membres avant de se faire pendre au 3e jour des exécutions.
Basically, the way most witch trials took place throughout this period, we have to also remember that Salem is this very small blip in the history of witchcraft. The witch trials were going on in Europe from about 1400 to about 1750. So Salem is this very tiny moment in this longer history of witch trials. And unfortunately, that's the way most witch trials played out. You see very frequently the people who, again, make you kind of uncomfortable in some way for whatever reason. You know, maybe they're lower class. Maybe they are women who fight with their husbands openly or fight with their neighbors. You know, maybe they're women who are independently supporting themselves, like a midwife or a healer, or have been widowed and have enough money to live on their own. You know, these people are frequently the first targets in witch trials, at least. And then as witch trials escalate, you'll see other people who don't fit that stereotype as clearly accused. But you do see men accused of witchcraft. That did happen. 75% of those who were executed during witch trials were women, but 25% were men. So there are some witch trials where the majority of those accused were men. So for example, in Iceland, you see one of those kind of unusual witch trials. But because at this time, a witch is technically not a gendered crime. Technically, it's anybody who makes a pact with the devil in return for magical powers. So anybody can technically do that, be a witch. But it was considered to be women were, based on the way women were perceived at this time, they were thought to be more susceptible to the devil's charms. It was easier to trick them into being a witch and so on. And that's why women were such an easy target during witch trials.
La vérité est que les procès des sorciers de Salem n'ont pas duré du tout, car apparemment les autorités puritaines avaient compris que les accusations liées à la sorcellerie n'étaient qu'une simple illusion et que les accusés avaient été donnés la mort à tort. Pour couvrir ces erreurs fatales, le gouverneur de la colonie, Sir William Phipp, a interdit toute écriture ou publication faisant référence à la chasse aux sorciers et a fait disparaître la localisation où a eu lieu les exécutions. Il est même dit que des livres parlant de l'histoire étaient vus brûler à Harvard Square. Boston, et cela est considéré que le gouverneur Sir William a fait tout ce qui était de son pouvoir pour enterrer toute preuve que des vies innocentes ont été perdues. C'est franchement fascinant de savoir qu'après tant d'années de recherche, il y a toujours des questions qui restent sans réponse et que malgré le nombre de documents liés à ces drames découverts par le groupe historien qui a passé d'ailleurs toute sa vie à chercher la vérité, qu'il reste beaucoup de choses dont on ignore de cette chasse aux sorciers. Les gens se posent des questions à savoir qu'est-ce qui a réellement causé à ces petites filles de 10 à 12 ans de se plaindre des douleurs dont personne ne peut détecter. Aussi célèbre que la ville de Salem puisse être, c'est que les gens ne réalisent pas, c'est que cette ville a été construite au prix de la mort de 19 martyrs chrétiens. Certains écrivains étrangers ont fait comprendre dans leurs livres que dès après les exécutions, les cadavres étaient jetés dans une fosse commune, pas profonde, juste à côté du lieu de l'exécution. Pire encore, il paraît que quelquefois même, on pouvait voir certains membres de ces morts-là, tels que les mains ou les pieds qui restaient visibles pendant qu'ils sont dits enterrés. En un mot, c'était franchement horrible. De l'histoire des sorcières de Salem, parlons cette fois-ci de Halloween, des traditions en Occident remontant à des milliers d'années à la fête du Samhain, qui est une fête du Nouvel An celtique.
I have been wondering, is Halloween American? Is it and why is it celebrated in Salem? It's like we have the witches, and then we have Halloween in Salem. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I'd say today it's primarily an American holiday, but it definitely does not originate here. So it originates in, primarily the UK. It's based on the fall harvest celebration Samhain, which is, again, thousands of years old. So this brings us back to pagan times, where the holidays and the celebrations around the year are very much based in nature, in this reverence for nature and the cycles of nature. So Samhain being a holiday where you recognize, you've just brought in the harvest, you're thankful for, a bountiful harvest, and you're also crossing into the time of the year where things are going to start to die around you. The earth goes to sleep, and there's a lot of natural death in the earth. And then later, the holidays in the spring and so on are when you celebrate the revival and life coming back and so on. So the imagery of Samhain being about death, demons and spirits and ghosts and things like that, and also darker things, skeletons and so on. This all comes from, thousands of years ago, where that holiday was, first being practiced in pagan communities. As time goes on, much with many other holidays, Samhain is Christianized. So we see that with many holidays today. For example, Valentine's Day is also a holiday that was originally a Roman fertility celebration that later kind of gets absorbed by Christianity and reconfigured to fit, more plainly within the Christian pantheon. So as time goes on, and the exact dates I would have to look up, I don't remember by memory, but, around 1800, let's say, All Saints Day gets moved, so it's November 2nd. So that slowly gets shifted, this holiday that also celebrates, your ancestors and things like that. That's a Christian holiday. That gets moved closer to Samhain, with the idea of kind of trying to take over this pagan custom so that it's more appropriate in a Christian society. And as time goes on, these kind of traditions evolve. Eventually you get All Hallows, which is November 1st, and then All Hallows Eve, which is October 31st, the night before All Hallows. So that's kind of how we get to this holiday being on October 31st. Again, there was always a holiday celebrated around this time. It just kind of gets shifted as time goes on. And then different traditions develop around it as time goes on. For example, there are examples of kids going door to door asking for a treat or or money in exchange for song and things like that. These were initially considered to be charitable acts. You would also give to the poor and the downtrodden during this time. This is a practice that eventually turns into trick-or-treating, and that's going on again primarily in the UK for quite a long time before it transforms into the trick-or-treating we know today. In the 19th century, because of the Irish potato famine, primarily, there's a huge wave of immigrants coming from Ireland and then Scotland and also the UK that arrive in America, and they bring with them these fall traditions. So in colonial America, there had been, fall celebrations that have a lot of the iconography we associate with Halloween today. So, for example, bobbing for apples and pumpkins and things like that. So this slowly morphs into this holiday that has been brought with these immigrants as they're coming in. It kind of changes and evolves, and eventually, by the time we get to like 1900, it's an incredibly popular holiday. You see it in like ladies' magazines, things like that, how to throw the perfect Halloween party. It's originally a party for young adults. It's not exactly a children's holiday. You would often go to these parties as a single young woman or young man, and there were lots of games that kind of paired you up throughout the night and so on and so forth. And then as time goes on and we get to the 20th century, it eventually becomes more of a child-dominated holiday. And by the time we're in like the 1950s, we really have Halloween as we know it now, with the trick-or-treating and the decorations and so on. So,
selon le worldhistory.org, Samhain signifie fin d'été et ce même festival marque la fin de la saison des récoltes et l'arrivée de l'hiver. Apparemment, les Celtes croyaient que le voile entre le monde des vivants et celui des morts était plus mince à cette période et que les morts avaient la possibilité de ainsi revenir et marcher là où ils avaient fait auparavant. En plus, sous la même tradition, on estime que ceux qui étaient décédés au cours de l'année écoulée, qui pour une raison ou une autre n'étaient pas encore allés de l'avant, le feraient à ce moment-là. Mais aussi on croyait qu'ils pouvaient interagir avec les vivants. Vraisemblablement, il y a très peu de choses qu'on connaît sur les rituels de l'ancien Samhain, mais il semble que cette observance comprenait le stockage des prévisions pour l'hiver, l'abattage des bovins et l'élimination des eaux dans des feux d'os, encore appelés bonfire en anglais ou encore feu de joie en français. L'une des rituels était de faire des réunions de communauté pour festoyer et boire à ce moment-là, mais aussi il y avait une prise de conscience de la finesse de la période de l'année et une des choses qu'on croyait était une possibilité que les morts reviennent et qu'ils soient présents pendant la fête. Dans la même lancée, on croyait qu'il y avait de très fortes chances que l'esprit d'une personne à qui on avait porté préjudice apparaisse. Afin de tromper les esprits, les gens assombrissaient leur visage avec les cendres de feu de joie, une pratique plus tard appelée déguisement, et cela se développe en port de masque. Une personne vivante reconnaîtrait l'esprit d'un être cher et pourrait alors se révéler, mais autrement rester à l'abri de l'attention indésirable des forces plus sombres. En quelque sorte, voici l'origine des déguisements que l'on voit pendant la période de Halloween, surtout à Salem, qui demeure à être l'épicentre du monde de l'histoire des mystères. Mesdames et messieurs, merci de nous avoir suivis. On se retrouve dans nos prochaines émissions.
just skin and bone, out here all alone. I've got a lyric. In a world that won't make sense to me. Anything is home. I'm just flesh and blood, grew up from the mud, not sure who I ought to be. Anyone will do. You can take your fight to me. You get what you see. I'll show you what you want me to. Anything you need. You see what you sow. But don't you want to know the one standing on his own in front of you?